So welcome to Zoom for those of you who have not been doing this full time for the last couple of weeks. It works really nicely. And I just want to thank Josh Lewis, who's still in the chat for a little while as the co-host, for helping us get on board. And if we have any problems, hopefully he will solve them. Okay, so the settings should be that you can unmute yourself if you would like to ask a question or you would like to make a contribution. So please do that. I'm not the lecturing type, although I'm learning how to do it now through Zoom. I will pause, and when there's a time when somebody could say something, please chime in. Okay, so tonight we are talking about Tsara't, which under normal circumstances doesn't draw a crowd, but under these circumstances, I think I'm not the only one who has been drawing some parallels and thinking about what we can learn from the experience of Tsara't, how it can help us manage the situation that we're in today. And what I would really like to share with you is some wisdom that I've learned from the Midrash on Vayikra, called Vayikra Rabbah, which, as you'll see, will take us to a very different place from the Psukim that teach us on Tsara't. And I think there's a very important lesson for us to learn from both the Psukim and from the Midrash. So that's my plan. And just so people can organize their very tight schedules, this year is going to be about a half an hour. So if you want to go and do yoga or whatever is up in the SAR tea room, you can do that shortly after our shir. Okay, so if you look at the sources, you have at the very top of the first page, you have two sets of 3 psukim, both of which come from Vayikra Perek Yud Gimel. And I put those there mostly for reference, not to study them in depth, but I wanted to just draw a few comparisons between our condition today, our circumstances, and the very mysterious condition known as Tsara't, sometimes mistranslated as leprosy, that appears in Vayikra. So here's some of the connections that come to mind, and please, here's the unmuting option if you want to draw one that I don't draw. If you notice in the opening psukim, and that's psukim Aleph, Bet, and Gimel, we're told that if a person finds on their body some kind of rash or swelling, and they're not really sure, is it something that's Tsara't, is it something else? The Kohen comes, and the Kohen has to look at the nega, has to look at this discoloration, and figure out and make a diagnosis. Now, that's the first thing that feels very similar. Lots of people having symptoms, not really sure, is it this, is it that? I would imagine there was a shortage of Kohanim, just as there are a shortage of tests today, to figure out whether this condition really is what it looks like it might be. The second thing is that, as you know from the psukim, that sometimes a person, it wouldn't be really clear whether they had it or not. And they would be checked once, and then they might be rechecked. And there would be lots of visitations. Hopefully the Kohen would not wear a hazmat suit, for those of you who are phoning in from New Rochelle. But there could be multiple incidences where you would be checked out by the Kohen. The third parallel between our situation and Tsara't is that there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of uncertainty when it comes to the person who looks at their skin. There's a lot of uncertainty today. And most importantly, and this I blogged about for those of you who have saw my Facebook post last week, the michutz lachana, outside the camp, right? The experience of a mitzora fundamentally was of somebody who was put outside to sit on purpose, badad. And we've all seen lots of references to the hitbodedut, the kind of willed and maybe not chosen, but now embraced sense of being alone and learning to be alone. But the mitzora would be forced to live outside the camp. And if you look just at that second set of psukim, a person who was finally pronounced to have what in fact he or she thought he had would go outside the camp. And I'm looking now at the second pasuk there, I'm reading in English. As for the person with a leprous affection, his clothes shall be rent, his head shall be left bare, and he shall cover over his upper lip, and he shall call out, Tameh, Tameh. He shall be unclean as long as the disease is on him. Being unclean, he shall dwell apart. Badad Yeshev, his dwelling shall be outside the camp. Now it's very striking because it seems like the person who already has been diagnosed with this condition and has to be away from everybody else, is also tasked with the job of making everybody know, informing everybody that he or she is in this condition, of having to call out tameh tameh, of really announcing one's condition to everybody else, which you can imagine may have been actually quite difficult. It's like self-imposing the stigma and letting everybody know what's going on with you. And I've been thinking about that a lot in terms of our condition, the people who really are sick, not those of us who are quarantined and are well enough to listen to a shir, right? The sense of aloneness and the sense of isolation and the sense perhaps of unintended stigma, which may come with this situation, reminds me of perhaps some of the, again, unintended consequences of Tsara't in the time of the Torah. The reason why a person would call out tameh tameh was what? Why would a person do that? I know so many of you from my class, but I'll just tell you, you're all thinking it, right? The reason why you would call out tameh tameh is because you wanted to warn people, don't come too close, right? To have tum'ah of Tsara't is one of the most powerful forms of tum'ah. You can become contagious in a tum'ah kind of way just by being under the same overhang as somebody who's a Tsara't. Not even, right? It could be 20 feet away, not 10 feet away or 6 feet away. But just being under the same, roof as somebody, you would also have that status. So a person who has been named as a Metzora would really call out, I am Tameh, stay away from me. All right. Now, what happens to Tsara't in the hands of Chazal, which is really what we're going to be looking at tonight, how the rabbis of the Midrash, and we're talking now 5th, 6th century CE, they totally transform the focus from the psukim, which is mostly, I only gave you the good parts, but all the psukim in the middle are all the details, the gory and rather cumbersome details of what would be necessary for the Kohen to know in order to make a diagnosis. Chazal shift our focus entirely away from what you would do if you thought you contracted it, and how to go into treatment and seclusion, and they shift our focus to avoiding Tsara't in the first place, right? And if you were not all muted, and I would ask you, well, when you hear the word Tsara't, what is your association? You would say, Lashon Hara, right? You would say Lashon Hara, because we were taught that as little kids. We don't really learn Vayikra anymore, but somewhere along the way, we heard that association, and that association was actually made by the rabbis. It's nowhere in Vayikra. Nowhere in Vayikra does it say that if you speak Lashon Hara, you should expect that you will get Metzora. The whole focus, again, away from the condition and trying to be a good diagnostician as a Kohen or knowing what to do if it comes to you, that is totally shifted towards a focus and an obsession on what Chazal understand to be the reason why a person would get it, and teaching us how to pay much more attention to our speech. So I want to show you how they do that. I want to show you some of the moves they make to shift the focus away, and then give us a chance, or me a chance, to lecture you about why this shift in focus might be so valuable for us right now. Okay, so if you look with me on the second page, everyone has the sources? Okay. If you look on the second page, the first source there is from Vayikra Rabbah, and I included that one not because it deals with Tsara't, but because I can't just jump in and teach you this Midrash on Vayikra without a bit of an introduction. So here's the introduction. First of all, the Midrash on Vayikra is dealing with a lot of practical problems that would have been posed to anybody reading the Torah in the 5th or 6th century CE. Somebody unmute themselves and tell me what would be one practical problem of those, any Jew who was reading Vayikra in the 5th or 6th century CE. No takers. Come on, Eric. All right, practically speaking, without a Beit HaMikdash, right? Just at a very base level, so many of the rituals, so many of the prescriptions, so many of the expectations of Vayikra are not possible. On a practical level, Vayikra is demanding a kind of reading and interpretation and reinterpretation that would allow people to make some sense of it. And Tsara't is no exception, right? All of the details that we skipped over, but again, involves a Kohen. The Kohanim were not functioning in the 5th or 6th century as leaders who would effectively come to you if you thought you had something on your body. So what are you going to do with these psukim? How am I to put it very crassly, as a rabbi imagining the 5th century, my goal is to get as many people to be involved in Talmud Torah. How do I convince them that it's worth reading Vayikra? Right? There's nothing in it that I can translate in any kind of practical way to my life. So here's the dilemma as told through this one passage in Vayikra Rabbah. I won't ask for anybody to read, I'll just read it. Okay, I'm going to read in the Hebrew. Rabbi Acha b'shem Rabbi Chanina bar Papa, shelo yehu Yisrael omrim, l'shavar hayinu makrivin korbanot umit'askin bahen, achshav she'en korbanot, mahu lihitasek bahen. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, ho'il v'atem mit'askin bahem, ma'aleh ani alechem ki'ilu atem makrivin oto. So you hear through this midrash a kind of live conversation that was taking place in, let's say, living rooms and batei knesset and other places where Jews were coming together to study the Torah. What do we do on a practical level? This is not talking about Tsara't. Again, it's choosing the piece of Vayikra that most people associate with Vayikra, although it only takes up 6 or 7 chapters. Korbanot, right? If in the past, the Jews would be able to offer korbanot, so it made a lot of sense, lihit asek bahen, right? That sounds like lasok b'divrei Torah. It made sense to invest yourself in studying the details, but now that there's no korbanot, mahu lihit asek bahen, right? Why should they? Why should we? Give me a reason. So the answer that's offered here is fascinating. First of all, notice that it's offered through the voice of God. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu. God does not show up in Rabbi Chanina bar Papa's head, right? To make a statement like that, this is how Chazal operate. I hear God's voice through my reading of these psukim, right? That's Torah Sheba'al Peh. And the answer through God is, if you immerse yourself in study, ho'il v'atem mitaskim bahem, it'll be as if you offered them. In other words, the study of the korbanot will be a replacement for the offering of the sacrifices. Fascinating. Now that's one strategy that we see Chazal offering to us, right? Study in place of temple worship. There's another substitution that we're more familiar with, and that is prayer, right? Tefillah as a substitute for the kind of worship that we find out about in Vayikra. But Vayikra Rabbah, which is the midrash that we're looking at tonight, briefly, offers a little bit of a different approach. Instead of saying, right, like you'll get credit if you spend a lot of time reading all these psukim about korbanot, and it will be that your study will be so fervent and intense that you'll get, right, a check in Shamayim, so to speak. It will be a substitute. The rabbis in Vayikra Rabbah say, here, let's try this instead. Instead of delving into the details, let's find a core value, a core idea in the psukim of Vayikra that is translatable and useful and meaningful to a contemporary audience. Now, of course, contemporary in Vayikra Rabbah is the 5th century, but as somebody who spent a lot of time studying this book, I actually find the rabbi's move of contemporary relevant value to be still useful today in the 21st century. So here we go. We're going to see some examples of, again, how they take the psukim in Tsara't, which for all intents and purposes are not useful anymore. They're empty letters, and they find a way of resuscitating, of breathing new life, and offering all of us a way of understanding and thinking about Vayikra that is immediately translatable. Everyone still with me? Awesome. Okay. We have 2 midrashim as examples. We'll see if we'll get to both. If not, you'll take one for extra learning later. This is a very enigmatic story that I'm about to teach you. I think I'm going to read it in English rather than in the Aramaic and the Hebrew. So everybody follow with me towards the bottom of that page. here we have our first example tonight of how the rabbis, again, take these psukim about Tsara't and shift the focus away from a concern with contracting it towards a concern with avoiding it in the first place. And the Midrash here begins with a pasuk from Tehillim. This I'm going to read in Hebrew. This is a pasuk that we all know and we sing. Mi ha'ish hachafetz chayim ohev yamim lirotov. Very nice pasuk. What could be even interesting about it, right? Who is the one who loves life? Who is the one who desires a long life? Is it a question? Is it not a question? Look later in your Tanakh and notice that it's actually not totally clear if it's rhetorical or real, and that would actually make you read the next pasuk very differently, right? You'll check later. But here goes the Midrash on that pasuk, responding to that pasuk, but again, bringing us back to Vayikra. A story of a traveling merchant, and you need to know that the word for merchant in Hebrew is rochel, who would go around to all the towns close to Tzipori. Many of us have been to Tzipori, right, in the north of Israel, and would declare saying, all who want to buy an elixir of life should come and take. All right, so there's a peddler, and this was his job. He would travel all around. He finally makes his way to Tzipori, and he's offering out, who wants a Sam Chaim? Who wants an elixir of life? He came to the town of Achbara and came close to the house of Rav Yanai, who was sitting and learning in his dining room. For those who are interested, the original in the Midrash is bitarni clay, which is like triclinium in Latin. Okay, he was in his fancy living room. So Rav Yanai, we already see, is not only a learner and a scholar, but he's also wealthy. And he's inside his living room and he hears the rochel calling out all who want to buy an elixir of life. Rav Yanai examined it and said to him, come here and sell some to me, right? So remember, he's in his living room. He is involved in Talmud Torah. He doesn't work at SAR, so anytime he hears a noise, he actually notices it, right? And he goes to the window and he hears this merchant who's calling out, who wants a Sam Chaim? He goes over and he says, I want some, come here. Said the merchant to Rav Yanai, no, you don't need it. Neither you nor those like you. Okay, as a merchant, that's a very strange move, right? He not only doesn't want to sell it to him, but he says, not anybody you know, nobody in your social circles, nobody needs this, nobody wants it. Rav Yanai pressed him, meaning he did not take no for an answer. So he came close to him. The merchant, imagine, leaves the dusty road, comes into his living room, and he brings out a book of Tehillim and showed him the pasuk, Mi ha'ish hachafetz chayim ohev yamim lirotov. What is written in the psukim right after it? Nitzor leshoncha meira usfatecha midaber mirma, sur meira va'aseh tov bakeh shalom v'radfehu. Said Rabbi Yanai, my whole life I have been reading that pasuk, and I did not know how to explain it until this traveling merchant came and pointed it out. Who is the man who is eager for life? Okay, this story needs a lot of unpacking, but I have to do it all by myself because you're so quiet. So I'll tell you this, there's a couple of things that are mysterious in this story. The first thing that's mysterious is, why didn't the merchant want to sell him the Sam Chaim? The second thing that's mysterious is, when Rav Yanai convinces him to finally come in, and he says, all right, fine, he brings out a scroll of Tehillim, which, by the way, in the ancient world was not super common, that people had their own private scrolls of Tehillim. So this Rochel is carrying this around, and he brings it and shows it to Rav Yanai. And you have to wonder, wait, was that the Sam Chaim the whole time? Is that what the peddler was trying to offer for everybody? Or is that special price for Rav Yanai that he brings out the Sefer Tehillim? The third thing that's mysterious is that, what do you mean my whole life I've been reading and I didn't know what it meant? And now this merchant comes and tells me what it means. What didn't he know? And why is he learning it from a Rochel? Yes, Rochel kamo rechilud in the chat box. That's exactly right. That's part of the beauty of the story. To regroup, we have a rabbi inside his house. He's studying Torah. We have a Rochel, we have a merchant who, by the way, in the ancient world, right, a peddler would probably be a gossip monger because he would go from town to town, spreading goods and spreading news. And here it is, the Rochel, who you would have expected to be the one that maybe Rav Yanai, maybe you would have said to me if you were speaking, Rav Yanai wanted the Rochel to come because he wanted to convince him. He wanted to teach the Rochel. He wanted to expose him that he was a quack, or he wanted to invite him in for Torah. That's not what happens. What happens in this story is that the Rochel becomes the teacher, right? The merchant becomes the one who actually shows Rav Yanai something that maybe he was missing. And here's what he was missing. He was missing the fact that in the Torah, he had access to the greatest gift of all. He, the person who spent his whole life studying Torah, yes, this is a critique by the rabbis about themselves. You could spend your whole life studying Torah and you could miss that the most important lesson is to pay attention to your ethical behavior. You're looking for a long life? I'll tell you how to live a long, good life. Live a good life by protecting and paying attention to your impacts on other people. And the irony is not lost that the Rochel, as we said, should have been the one to be put in his place, but in fact was the one to share this. So the extra goodie that the Midrash gives us is that the rabbis admit and are teaching us that there are truths and wisdom to learn from everybody. Even if you spend all your time studying Torah, you got to keep your ears open, you got to keep your eyes open, and you never know who is going to be the one who's going to show you the thing that you were just missing, even though it was right in front of your eyes. Sometimes in the Midrash, it's a child. Sometimes it's a woman. Sometimes it's a Roman general, right? Marginal characters in the time of the Midrash who end up showing up and teaching the rabbis something really important that they were just missing. Okay, now, the last Midrash, I can't really teach well in 5 minutes, but I will try my best, okay? So if you look with me very quickly, that the source number 3, Leviticus Rabbah chapter 13. What you see here is a second example of what we're seeing tonight, right? Tsara't in the Torah, as we said, never tells you how you get it. It just begins with, you wake up one day and suddenly you have this thing on your body. What do you do next? The Midrash does not take us down that route. The Midrash takes us down the route of, hold up, what's really important? What's really important so far from the story that we just read is paying attention to ethical truths, is making sure that your Torah learning is taking you out into the world, recognizing the power and the impact that you have in other people. Here's the second truth that Chazal focus our attention on. I'll show you just 2 examples. The Midrash begins with a very strange pasuk from Ecclesiastes. Do not allow your mouth to cause your flesh to sin. Okay, very strange pasuk because we don't normally think of our mouth as being separate from ourselves. More on that in real time for those who are interested. But the Midrash actually takes that very literally and offers us the possibility of thinking about our mouth as kind of having, this is a funny phrase, a mind of its own, and needing to learn to rein it in. But more than just giving us that musar, what the Midrash does, you notice how I put it in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? Those numbers are mine. Those are all different examples that Chazal offer us of places in our everyday lives where we use our mouths, where we utter speech, and we may not even realize how easily that speech could take us down the road we didn't intend to go. Okay, I'm going to show you what I mean in a minute. And more to the point, these 5 different examples are almost like 5 major areas of social life, communal life, public life, halavai. We should live in public, collective, outdoor life, but 5 places in our community where speech is at the fabric of how we create the bonds that now are responsible for the contagion, right, that we're a part of. So here we go. Here are some of the examples. The first one, this is one of my favorites because we've all been guilty of this. The Midrash says, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi interpreted the verse in terms of those who pledge charity in public but do not give it. right? Like the person on Shabbos morning or on Simchas Torah who says, okay, I'm gonna buy that aliyah for $200, but then never mails in the check, okay? So the Midrash, if you look at it, takes the whole pasuk piece by piece and says, don't do this. This could happen. You could say to the chazan, right, I'm going to give $200. But then when they ask you about it, you say, oh, I pledged, I didn't pledge. Did I really say that? I'm not really sure. Don't do that. Why not? Looking back in the Midrash, it will destroy the work of your hands. Even the small amount of property that you possess, you will introduce confusion to them. Meaning, if you're not careful about the kinds of commitments that you make, right? And everybody, I'm sure, is going to donate to SAR after this incredible communal effort, right, that we have been a part of. If you make that pledge and you use your words, it's just words, it's air. But when you take a stand and you say, I'm committing X to this community, you've now created a certain trust in the room. And people listen to you and people trust you. If you don't follow through with it, what are you doing? Maybe it's not such a big deal, it was just $18, right? But you're introducing a corrosive effect into what's the part of society here? It's the shul, okay? That's place number one. Go to number two for a minute. Number two, maybe did I say number one is my favorite? I think number two is my favorite. Rabbi Benjamin interpreted the verse in terms of pretenders of scholarship. What's a pretender of scholarship? Somebody who says, I finished this Masechet, I learned the whole of Tanakh, right? And you didn't really, okay? Now, sometimes it's not because you didn't, right? You weren't meaning to not, but I almost did, making yourself seem a little bit more learned than you are, okay? And again, the Midrash says, don't do that. Don't do that. When you speak about what you've studied, and it's so beautiful, it would be great if that's what everybody was lying about, right? How much learning they're doing. It's beautiful. This is the Beit Midrash, but it's another institution in our community which, realize it or not, relies on a sense of trust. And that trust is created through all the speech acts that we're a part of. Okay, here's the takeaway. We're not going to look at all of it. I told you the other ones you'll see. It's the marketplace, it's the court. Everywhere we go, every part of our society is built on trust through speech. Now, what are Chazal doing when they're connecting this to Tsara't, right? Because that's why we're on this call. It's about Tsara't. Number one, they're shifting our focus away from, as we said, what to do if you get it, to how to avoid it. But by pointing out here all these ways in which we could fall short or sow the seeds of distrust, even as slight as they are, even as unintentional as they are, what they're really reminding us is how much we care about our community. They're really reminding us that all the places where we have the power to bring our speech are the places that we want to invest ourselves, and where we as individuals, as we know so well through this experience, are so connected and interwoven and wrapped up with each other. So when we take a look at a situation like Tsara't, or when we look at a situation like the one that we're in, I think what we're all doing by being on this call is realizing that, yes, there's the self and there's who each of us are, but we are indelibly linked and connected one to the other, and we need each other, right? And so speech, the places where we recognize that we have an impact, are the places where we can actually give to each other during this time. And they are the places where we can use our resources latov in a positive kind of way of building a sense of community, rather than, God forbid, sowing a greater sense of alienation or mistrust or distrust. I would say, are there any questions? But I don't think that anybody's going to say anything. So I will just say this. This made my night, seeing all of you on the screen. I really enjoyed learning with you. I hope that this was useful to you and valuable to you. And if you have any other thoughts about Tsara't that you want to chat with me about, I'm happy to learn with you in the coming days or weeks or however long we're in these circumstances. Thank you all so much. And tomorrow night, Rabbi Health Guide is giving a shir about the Parsha and Chet HaEgel. See you then.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So much.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Dr. Jacobowitz, you're the best.
Who is that?
Thank you.
Talking. Oh, Ruthie. Hi, Ruthie. You don't have to get
Bye.
off. You can say your comment now that there aren't that many people.
I don't have a comment for you. I just really enjoyed.
Okay, we need to study more Vayikra, everyone.
Dr. J, this is Rivka talking. My what do you call it? My picture is off. I went to a second year of seminary at Yavne Seminary in Cleveland, and Rabbi Simchaya Usban, the mother of Rabbi Usban in Tells Riverdale, who was, she's a fascinating woman, a Holocaust survivor. Her father was Rosh Yeshiva of Tells in Europe. She taught all the parts of Tanakh you don't learn. So we learned Tsara't and Negei Batim, and then we learned Eov and Daniel. She was like, why should I teach you, the story parts of Tanakh again? You'll learn those in a lot of other places. And that was what that second year of seminary was.
I don't know. I'm a big believer. I think we have to bring it back to SAR because there's so much to learn from Vayikra in how to reinvest ourselves with a center that is sacred. It needs a lot of translating and updating. Right? It's not so simple, but there's a lot in there that we're missing.
That's also, that whole project is a very meaningful project, looking up psukim that seem totally not related to the world we're living in and actually thinking about how they speak to what we're doing is a very good exercise for an observant Jew in the 21st century.
Exactly. So Vayikra, this is why I'm obsessed with it. It is it's an analogy for everything, right? It's so clear that Vayikra needs our help, but so many aspects of the Torah need our updating and rethinking and transformation. So, all right, guys.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Ruthie.
So you talked a lot about how Chazal reframed Tsara't as something that we can control whether or not it happens to us. Like we speak Lashon Hara. What do you think was the impulse for that? Meaning, do you think it has anything to do with that earlier idea about how in lieu of practicing the mitzvah, we learn about it? Just how it makes it more accessible. Even though I'm not going to get Tsara't, I can learn this amazing lesson about Lashon Hara. Do you think that has anything to do with that sort of push to reframe?
Yeah. So just to be clear, because I wasn't so clear in the beginning, that passage that we were talking about of lihitasek bahen, and that will be in place of performance, that's not the approach of a Vayikra Rabbah. That's the approach of another book of Midrash called the Sifra, which I don't recommend reading because it's very boring, right? If you think Vayikra is boring, Sifra, right, attaches the psukim to halacha, but it goes into depth into every single detail. But Vayikra Rabbah, I think, is saying to us, right, and this is one example of it, but there are many, that Vayikra needs to be, we need to glean the insight in how to build our society. So this was an example of ethics, but another time I can share with you the midrashim on a woman who's postpartum and the series of processes that she goes through to go from being tamei to being tahor, right? Which is very literally bloody and bodily. And what Chazal do with that is use it as an opportunity to talk about theology and to talk about Hashem's role in all of our lives. So all of these places, right, which seem so A, obsolete, and B, right, hard to access, become opportunities to really think about ethics, theology, relationships with other people, other nations, and maybe in class when we're back in the building, we could look at some other examples, Ruthie.
Sounds like a fun time.
Dr. Jacobowitz, I would love to see those sources about the postpartum thing because my most recent obsession is Mara Benjamin's The Obligated Self.
Yes.
And so, which I don't know anything about except the book that I read, but I'd be fascinated to see how those midrashic sources sort of line up with that.
Well, you have a lot of time in the next few weeks. I'll send you my dissertation.
Oh, great. Can't wait.
That's your dissertation?
Could you send it to me?
Can you send
Can
that?
I have it too? I also have time.
Well, if anybody wants to send me an email, I'm not going to just send it out, but it would increase the number of people who have read it from like 5 to, 40 just in 1 week. That would be great.
I was told that the dissertation is the only book that you write for less than one reader, because even your advisor doesn't read the whole thing.
For all those aspiring PhDs out there, don't be discouraged. It's still worth it.
Well, thank you so much.
Okay, guys. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jacobowitz.
Dr. Jacobowitz, I
Have a
can't
good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jacobowitz.